Every day, I share another story from the golden age and the moments that shaped an unforgettable era. If you wish to keep these memories alive with me, feel welcome to subscribe. It costs nothing, yet it means more than you know. Thank you for being here. Now, let us begin. At 61, Johnny Depp is finally speaking in a way he never allowed himself to before, and the change is gentle but striking enough to make people pause. After years of silence, distance, and difficult public chapters, he is slowly drawing back the curtain on choices that once puzzled the world. For decades, he lived beneath Hollywood's brightest lights, yet he now admits that the life many imagined for him was never quite the life he truly lived. What he is sharing today touches on old experiences that fame never softened and reveals what many quietly sensed about the reasons behind his retreat. It is not a dramatic appeal, nor an attempt to rewrite the past. It is simply a man trying to recover the parts of himself that drifted away long before anyone realized he felt lost. When he stepped back from Hollywood in 2023, the decision surprised nearly everyone who had followed him for so long. There was no farewell interview, no final walk down a red-carpeted aisle, no carefully crafted goodbye. He closed the door of his Los Angeles home and moved quietly to Somerset, England, offering no public explanation. One day, he was a familiar presence in an industry that had depended on his energy. The next, he was gone. Fans searched for even the smallest glimpse of him. Reporters waited for a statement that never came. Weeks turned into months, and still there were no confirmed sightings, no airport photographs, no studio entrances. The man who had once seemed to be everywhere had become almost impossible to find, as if he had stepped into a quieter world beyond the reach of noise and expectation. Later, in a rare local interview, Depp explained that he had not been trying to hide, he had been trying to heal. "I'm not trying to be seen anymore. I'm trying to find peace," he said. And that single line moved quietly across social media, revealing more about his state of mind than any polished Hollywood appearance ever could. Behind those few words stood a man who had spent years navigating accusations, disappointments, shifting loyalties, and the weight of personal heartbreaks. The stillness he sought in Somerset was not an escape from the world, but a first step toward reclaiming pieces of himself that long hours under studio lights had worn thin. Life there was far from glamorous, even though his estate stretched across vast open land. He lived simply. He rose before sunrise, walked slowly along quiet paths, read outdoors, and tried to reconnect with the small moments he had not felt in decades. Those close to him said he spoke very little during those early months, not out of anger, but out of sheer exhaustion. For someone who had spent half his life being observed, praised, questioned, and analyzed, the gentle countryside finally felt like a place where he could breathe. Yet even within that quiet, something unexpected began to grow. Johnny was not fading away, he was rebuilding, and the first signs of that return did not appear on a film set. They appeared on a canvas, where he began to paint the emotions he had carried for years. While the world continued to wonder whether Johnny Depp had quietly stepped away from his career, he was pouring each feeling, each memory into colors and shapes that spoke in ways he no longer wished to verbalize. He found that what he could not say aloud slowly moved into his art. Painting had always lived quietly in the background of his world, but after 2022, it shifted into something deeper, something more essential. It became a form of gentle therapy, a private outlet where he could sort through years of emotional weight that had remained unspoken. Each stroke on the canvas carried fragments of experiences he rarely acknowledged. Every color, every face, every shaded corner became part of a long process of healing. And as he painted, the people around him began to notice something unexpected. Johnny Depp was not fading away, he was slowly returning to himself. In Somerset, far from Hollywood's unending noise, he began creating work that felt raw, dreamlike, and almost painfully honest. These images revealed the impressions of someone who had walked through disappointment, public humiliation, and the quiet unraveling of an identity he had spent more than 40 years shaping. So when his collection, titled A Bunch of Stuff, opened in New York in 2024, it did more than draw interest. It startled people. Collectors who anticipated his familiar pop art style were met instead with scenes that felt fractured and atmospheric, filled with open spaces, softened colors, and faces that appeared both near and distant at the same time. These were not the creations of a man seeking applause. They were the expressions of someone trying to restore his inner world, one slow brushstroke at a time. Limited edition prints sold for as much as $50,000 each, with many reserved before the exhibition even opened. Within months, sales surpassed 5 million, a quiet reminder that even outside the film industry, Depp still held a strong voice. He had simply learned to express it through a different medium. Critics remarked on the weight of emotion in the paintings. Some described them as a form of visual stillness, others as a soft mourning from a man who had endured much and continued onward. But for Depp, it was never about interpretations or thoughtful reviews. He once shared with a close friend that painting allowed him to express feelings he struggled to speak aloud. Reflections on heartbreak, lost trust, confusion, and the long stretches of time when he felt unseen. But art was not the only thing pulling him forward. Music, the first love of his youth, returned to him like an old companion. And the moment he picked up a guitar again, something shifted inside, as if another door to healing had quietly opened. Music had been Johnny Depp's earliest refuge, long before recognition, long before film sets, long before public attention turned his life into a constant test. So when he stepped back from Hollywood, it felt natural that he drifted back to the one place that had always felt sincere. Reuniting with Alice Cooper and Joe Perry, he returned to the stage with Hollywood Vampires. But this time, he was not chasing energy or seeking to prove anything. He was playing simply to breathe again. Their European tour became an unexpected turning point. On stage, Depp no longer moved with the restless spark people remembered from the days when Jack Sparrow shaped his image. Instead, he played with a calm, steady presence, as though each note helped anchor him. Crowds at large festivals, including Germany's Wacken Open Air and performances across France, felt the change instantly. This was not a man performing for applause. This was someone healing in real time. During their rendition of David Bowie's Heroes, his voice carried a gentleness fans had never heard before. It did not sound like a tribute. It sounded like a quiet declaration of resilience. Behind the scenes, his bandmates noticed the difference as well. Depp had become more thoughtful, often sitting alone with his guitar long after rehearsals ended. He no longer sought the chaotic nights that once followed him everywhere, and he no longer drank. Since late 2022, he had chosen a life of sobriety, not through announcements or public displays, but through a private promise to regain clarity of mind and ease within his body. The change was visible. He had grown leaner, moved with more intention, and carried a softer kind of strength. His expression appeared calmer, the tension that once marked his features gradually fading. Locals in Somerset mentioned seeing him walk before sunrise, moving quietly through open fields and narrow lanes, as if relearning how to breathe in rhythm with the countryside. He would often stop by the small library he personally supported or sit quietly in his garden with a book, letting calm settle into him little by little. These simple routines grounded him, turning music into something peaceful again, not a performance, but a kind of meditation. During a private sound check, Depp told a friend, "I don't have anything left to shout about. Stillness is louder." And for the first time in many years, his life truly reflected those words. But even with this growing sense of peace, the shadows of his past did not simply drift away. The trial, the accusations, the public conflict that unfolded before the entire world remained close behind him. Facing them meant returning to one of the most difficult chapters of his life. No period left a deeper mark than the years tied to the dispute with Amber Heard. What began in May 2016 with public claims grew into one of the most widely discussed and emotionally charged Hollywood conflicts of the era. Depp did not speak at first, trusting time to bring clarity. Instead, that silence created challenges he never anticipated. Major studios distanced themselves before any full understanding of the situation emerged. Disney moved on from Pirates of the Caribbean, and Warner Brothers asked him to step away from Fantastic Beasts, decisions that left many fans stunned. Headlines formed quick conclusions, filling in the silence with assumptions, and by 2018, the difficulty deepened. When The Sun published a description of him using the term wife-beater, Depp took legal action in the UK, resulting in a loss in 2020. That setback weighed heavily on his public standing. Media outlets portrayed him as troubled or adrift, building narratives around struggle and decline. Depp withdrew from the spotlight altogether, avoiding interviews and stepping away from public events. Friends later shared that he felt profoundly let down, not only by Heard, but by an industry that had celebrated him for decades and then stepped back without hesitation. Those close to him recalled moments where he paced in quiet frustration, trying to make sense of rumors and stories that resurfaced day after day, each one leaving a fresh emotional bruise. The experience tested him more deeply than any role he had ever taken on. It reshaped his understanding of trust, loyalty, and the cost of silence. And while the world debated his name across screens and headlines, he tried to hold on to the parts of himself that still felt steady, even as everything around him shifted. Then came the moment that changed the entire conversation. In early 2020, a leaked audio recording surfaced in which Heard acknowledged her own part in their conflicts and spoke about the situation in a dismissive way. Overnight, the public's perspective shifted. Millions began sharing the phrase, "Justice for Johnny Depp," urging the world to reconsider a narrative that had been accepted too quickly. By 2022, Depp filed a defamation case in Virginia, not out of retaliation, but to reclaim his voice after years of being spoken for. For 6 long weeks, the courtroom felt less like a legal battle and more like a careful examination of a relationship that had become deeply strained. Depp spoke about a past incident involving an injury to his finger after an object was thrown, and he described years of emotional difficulty. More than 30 witnesses testified, some sharing experiences that suggested tension and volatile moments behind closed doors. Each day of the trial felt weighty and unforgettable. When the jury ruled in Depp's favor, the outcome felt significant, not because it erased anything, and not because it restored his old life, but because it closed a door that remained open far too long. The verdict offered a chance to rebuild without a lingering shadow. Afterward, Depp withdrew from the world for nearly 2 months. He barely spoke to anyone, retreating into quiet reflection. In a private letter, he wrote, "I didn't fight to win. I fought to survive." The legal victory cleared his name on paper, but the emotional damage reached deeper. Yet even after losing so much, his sense of stability, his trust in others, and even his direction, a quiet shift began to form inside him. It did not bring him back as a triumphant Hollywood figure. It brought him back as a man beginning again, piece by piece. A gentle rebirth. Life in Somerset and the man he became. When the trial ended in 2022, something within Johnny Depp changed in a way that felt lasting. The tense conversations, the sleepless nights,
the constant feeling that his words might be twisted or misunderstood, he stopped carrying those burdens with him anymore. Instead, he stepped into a life shaped by stillness, the kind of calm he hadn't felt since childhood.
Somerset became the refuge he never realized he needed. Locals described someone who moved with an unhurried grace, blending into village life like any neighbor rather than a global figure. They saw him walking at sunrise, pausing to read in his garden, or quietly leaving book donations at the village library. For the first time in decades, Johnny Depp wasn't performing. He was simply living. His physical transformation reflected this inner shift. He grew leaner, not for a role or a contract, but because he finally cared for himself with intention. A local doctor who saw him for routine checkups noted that his health markers were improving, his energy steadier, and that he was no longer slipping into old habits. Depp had remained sober since late 2022, not through public declarations or dramatic announcements, but through a private promise he made to himself. People who met him in Somerset said he carried a calmness that surprised them. His voice was softer, his humor gentler, and his presence far quieter than his reputation suggested. It was clear that he had chosen a slower life, and that the quiet countryside had helped him rebuild in ways no film set ever could. Little by little, the man who had once lived beneath the brightest lights began to rediscover who he was without them. He carried a steady energy now, entirely different from the high-pressure rhythm of Hollywood that once followed him everywhere. And nothing revealed this emotional shift more clearly than an art event in France. When a reporter gently asked about Amber Heard, the entire room fell silent, bracing for tension. Instead, Depp paused, looked directly at the reporter, and replied in a calm, measured voice, "The past is over. It's time to move on." The room was stunned, not because of the words, but because of the tone. There was no anger, no sharpness, no lingering hurt. It sounded like someone who had stopped repeating his pain and finally allowed it to drift away. The years of conflict, disappointment, and heartbreak no longer held him in place. He wasn't seeking revenge, and he wasn't searching for redemption. He wasn't asking Hollywood to return to him. He was not trying to rebuild the old version of himself, the man who worked endlessly, ignored his own exhaustion, and wore fame like a heavy shield. Instead, he was learning to exist without that pressure pressed against him each day. Yet even as he settled into this quiet new life, something unexpected began to draw him back toward the world. He had believed he was done with it, but his next steps were guided not by noise or spectacle, but by meaning, returning on his own terms. Johnny Depp's return to cinema was not grand or dramatic. It was thoughtful. In 2023, after nearly a full year of silence, he walked onto the stage at the Cannes Film Festival for the premiere of Jeanne du Barry. No fanfare, no fiery speeches, just a man choosing to re-enter his craft in a way that felt steady and true. It was not the comeback of a star desperate to regain spotlight. It was the quiet return of an artist choosing work that reflected where he now stood, calmer, clearer, and guided by intention rather than expectation. It was his first major public appearance since the long legal battle. And when the film ended, the entire room rose in a 7-minute standing ovation. People were not applauding only the performance. They were acknowledging a man who had walked through some of the most difficult years of his life and still found the strength to create something meaningful. Depp did not stand there soaking in the applause like a triumphant returning star. Instead, he appeared almost shy, almost
taken aback, as if he were not accustomed to being met with kindness anymore. His return was not about reclaiming a position in Hollywood. It was about showing up on his own terms, without bending to anyone's expectations. Jean Dubarry reminded audiences of his quiet power as an actor. But projects like Day Drinker revealed something even more personal. He was choosing stories that resonated with his own inner world, not stories shaped to satisfy studios, franchises, or headlines. For the first time in years, Johnny Depp was not stepping back into the spotlight as the figure Hollywood tried to mold. He was stepping forward as the man he had rebuilt, steadier, quieter, grounded, and finally living for himself. The applause that filled the room was more than enthusiasm. It was recognition. Recognition of someone who had been examined, doubted, and criticized for years, and yet still carried the strength to offer something true. Director Maïwenn later shared that she chose him not because of controversy, but because no other actor could bring King Louis XV to life with the same depth he carried within him. His performance was not a comeback. It was a statement. It marked a turning point in how Depp approached his work. The chase for blockbusters, the pressure of franchises, the demands of Hollywood's machinery, those days were behind him. He was no longer interested in roles built for spectacle. He wanted characters that spoke to real human truths, shaped by experience, reflection, and the quiet resilience that comes from enduring life's most difficult chapters.
That shift became even clearer when director Mark Webb offered him a role in Day Drinker, a heavy, introspective drama alongside Penelope Cruz. Webb described the character not as a hero or a villain, but as a person carrying a deep emotional wound, moving through life with a sense of quiet disorientation. And in Webb's own words, Depp was the only actor who could bring that kind of raw vulnerability to the screen. The choice of roles signaled a new era for him. He was no longer seeking the familiar rhythm of fame or the structure of large-scale productions. He was choosing work that mirrored the truths he had lived, the lessons, the scars, the wisdom, and the soft resilience born from chaos. It was no longer about returning to who he once was. It was about honoring who he had become. It was a role that asked for honesty rather than spectacle, and that is precisely why Depp considered it. Then, Terry Gilliam approached him with something even more unexpected, a role as a dark, symbolic figure in Carnival at the End of Days. Gilliam believed Depp was uniquely equipped to portray darkness with an inner calm, a balance few actors could reach. But even with these offers, Depp didn't rush. He didn't soak in the renewed attention or treat it as a second rise. He remained grounded, reminding the people around him that he no longer needed Hollywood to define him. If he chose to return to filmmaking, it would be for the art itself, not for the spotlight. This new chapter was shaped not by the projects alone, but by the way he approached them. There was no urgency to reclaim status, no desire to prove something to the world, no hunger for validation. Instead, he chose slowly and with intention. Each project reflected a man who had shed every identity placed upon him and emerged gentler, wiser, and more centered than many expected. Where his path leads next remains uncertain, even to him. But for the first time in a long while, that uncertainty feels like freedom. Johnny Depp is not chasing a career anymore. He is living a life that finally belongs to him. At 61, his journey has been shaped by loss, renewal, and a quiet strength that few saw coming. He is not trying to revive old glory. He is choosing peace, creativity, and authenticity. And now that he has spoken truths the world long suspected, one question lingers for those who have watched his transformation unfold. Do you believe Johnny Depp should return to the world of Hollywood or continue the peaceful life he has finally built for himself? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if this story resonated, feel welcome to like and subscribe for more chapters like this.